get started? Okay, wonderful. We're getting into the nudies, and we're hoping to have a very interactive discussion. Open with just a. Is this not working? Okay, a little bit. Okay, there we go. All right. You know, we've all heard so much about AI, and often we hear about AI with the risks, hallucinations, privacy, all that sort of stuff. Absolutely, we are attentive to risks. Vivli has an AI risk framework that will be shared soon. But on this panel, I'd like to be more visionary, actually, and focus on opportunities for AI, particularly around clinical trials, data sharing, and data reuse. And we're going to be cover AI quite broadly, calling out two different kinds of AI for us to keep in mind as we have our panel discussion. One is predictive AI, so that the sort of machine learning, you know, what is your risk for readmission kind of AI that you all know. We're going to call that analytic AI. And then, of course, the hot topic of the last, year or two, generative AI like ChatGPT, which I would like to suggest that we think about generative AI as a social technology and what that does for how we work and how we interact with each other across people that we may not have interacted with as much, and what does AI do to facilitate different workflows in different communities. So keep that in mind, the analytic and sort of social technology aspects of AI. So today, we're going to talk about what our panelists are working on today and what they might expect over the next 5 years. We know that this is a new field, and there may be terms that are confusing, and if so, I will ask the panelists to just note and define terms that might be confusing to our audience or indeed to ourselves. So I think we will start off, and I'll ask each panelist to introduce yourself and where you're coming from on AI and data sharing and reuse in your current role. Basically, sort of where you're coming from and what are you bringing to this panel, and then I think we'll go from there, and I think it'll be an open discussion. So might as well start with David to my right.
Yeah, so thank you, Ida. Happy to be on this panel. My perspective on AI is coming as a regulatory lawyer, and so I am advising clients that include hospitals, universities, pharmaceutical and medical device companies on their use of AI technologies. And so that includes use in clinical trials for various purposes. It includes using data within a hospital, let's say, to train AI models that are used in that hospital or that might be developed as a medical device under the FDA software as a medical device framework, and then shared with other entities. When it comes to data sharing in particular, often what I'm helping clients think about is how does the use of data, large data sets to train an AI model, how does that fit within existing paradigms that we have in the US and elsewhere about health data privacy, for example? And so from the last panel, we spent a lot of time talking about under the HIE framework, what are the permissions in the US for data to be shared for different purposes between healthcare entities. Well, the same rules that apply in the HIE construct, we're thinking about HIPAA, we're thinking about state privacy laws, those all become very relevant when you're using health data and you want to either share it or use it internally at your organization to train an AI model. And so oftentimes we're thinking about, is this a research activity? Are we creating generalizable knowledge? Maybe, if we're developing a new device. And is that done under a research paradigm where we might have IRB oversight? We might need to seek patient authorization or IRB waiver of authorization for the use of a patient's health information. Or is this something we're trying to think of as a quality improvement activity? Are we using this AI tool really to improve the quality of care at our healthcare institution? But we're going to argue it's not creating generalizable knowledge. It's not something that is done under a research paradigm. And that distinction is important for a lot of my clients. And the last thing I'll say just as intro is a lot of my time is also spent on thinking about when a healthcare institution, for example, engages a third party to help them develop an AI technology. What rights does that third party have in the underlying data? Are they incorporated into the model itself so that they become an inherent part of it? Are they just used for the training and then they can be discarded? Even if they're just used for the training, can that vendor, can that third party, can they retain those data afterwards and use them to continue to refine and improve the model? And can they do that regardless of whether the improved model is used by the healthcare institution that was originally their customer? Those are all the types of questions that come up with every day with respect to AI in my practice and that I'm grappling with. So happy to discuss more in the Q&A and discussion period.
Wonderful. Lots of open questions there. Dawei.
Dawei Lin. I'm the Associate Director for Bioinformatics at the Division of Allergy, Immunology, and Transplantation. It is a division, extramural division of National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, NIAID. So there's a long set of words. I guess I'm probably provide some the program officer perspective of AI and research, but the opinion is my own. I'm not representing NIH or NIAID, and so my perspective is I am a computational biology by training. I think there's a lot of things about AI. Probably we need like AI to help define what the AI is, but I think what I wanna maybe focus on today is about the data quality and the long-term preservation and sustainability of data. So I started my career at the Protein Data Bank. Is a repository, have a collection of protein structures. And some of you may heard of the name, like the last month, the Nobel Prize was won by the AlphaFold that predict protein structure. They're using the PB data. So that's kind of the quality that needed for enable research. But on the other hand, it took 50 years to realize that value. And now in my portfolio, we found another repository called the Import. It's an immunology repository. It's existing for 20 years. And we hope will not take another 30 years to have another Nobel Prize winning. And Import is a part of Vivli members. But I think on the other hand, we kind of learned a lot from the repository operations that is different from just like the scientific research. It has its own set of operations. So I led a global group, develop a trust principles. I heard the trust mentioned aloud. I think this is a set of trust principles for digital repository. It's more like transparency, responsibility, user focus, and sustainability and technology. So that's kind of the things we coming from. And I also personally involved with the across NIH effort and help in a working group develop and write the notice of award for multi-module AI for scientific research. And also I'm kind of involved the Bridge to AI, which is a common program to generate data, not models for AI. And I kind of participate as a project scientist and also kind of help develop the first round of funding opportunities for repository and knowledge base. And that's kind of the things that we're doing. So that's for me.
Karla.
Hi, I'm Karla Childers from Johnson & Johnson. I'm the head of Bioethics-based science and technology policy, and in that capacity, I provide bioethics consultative services, chairing our internal committee and providing just routine advice. I also have a policy oversight component where we own various ethics-based research policies and provide the oversight, and then we also have a thought leadership and education component. Regarding artificial intelligence, on the bioethics side, I serve as a subject matter expert for the application within ethics-based types approaches and product development. So very early on, I was clear to the organization that I wasn't going to be their AI ethics person that could solve supply chain, HR, finance, and all of those issues. So we've taken an approach internally that I serve then as a subject matter expert for ethics-based research questions and artificial intelligence on the various governance structures within Johnson & Johnson, much like probably other companies have different panels and different ways of providing. So a lot of that does come up with regards to use of data, but then it's also just the ethical application within clinical trials. With regards to data sharing, particularly, one of my roles is that since I joined J&J 11 years ago, I've overseen our collaboration with the Yale University Open Data Access, or YODA for all of you Star Wars fans, YODA project. That was our data sharing platform that we put in place and have managed that relationship and overseen the policy. So we've been thinking a lot and seeing an uptick in requests that have been coming in for programs for research projects that are in the artificial intelligence machine learning realm. I'm super interested in terms of that to think about forward-looking impacts on the platform. What kind of policies do we need to think about putting in place? Do we need to take a different approach about how we think about some of the review of those research projects, but very much involved in partnering with our operations team to figure out how we can support all the researchers wanting to do artificial intelligence types projects with our data.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Subha Madhavan. I work in Pfizer R&D. I have the great fortune of leading a global team called AI/ML, Quantitative and Digital Sciences, within our research and development organization. We do three simple things. The first one we call as clinical AI/ML, and the goal here is to leverage multimodal data, such as from clinical trials, real-world evidence data, biomarker data, and others, and use that model and the data sets to inform next generation of treatments. So we impact our entire portfolio by leveraging these multimodal data sets. There's a lot of analytic AI in the clinical AI space, just to kind of reference back to Ida's definition of predictive models and analytic AI. The second function is what we call as operational AI, and here this is all about generative AI, where we are deploying large language models to really optimize our processes in clinical development. As you can imagine, drug development is a very elaborate and very intricate process, and there are lots of documents and collaterals that are produced at every step of the way. The question we are asking is, could we leverage large language models to really make these processes more efficient? And the third component is what we call as digital AI, and this is all about wearables data. How many of you wearing Fitbit or an Apple Watch here? I see some hands up. We think very hard about the types of data that are coming out of these Apple Watches and Fitbits, particularly in the context of what the earlier panel, the gentleman from Epic mentioned, a care anywhere model. So could we collect data that can tell us about efficacy and safety in the comfort of their homes, and what data can we collect? And regulators are very receptive to this. We're starting to think about digital endpoints in therapy areas such as Duchenne muscular dystrophy, rare diseases, cancer, cachexia, and others, where we don't have to bring participants to clinical sites every so often to collect data. Could we actually use these devices to collect data from the comfort of their homes? So those are sort of three primary functions. With regard to these three functions, we interact quite a bit with regulators, right? So to understand what is the AI code of ethics, what does fit for purpose AI really mean? What does it mean to actually submit an analysis plan that describes a machine learning model to our regulators? How should we be thinking about the data and the models? Is it representative enough of the population that we want to serve? Not just the population we want to recruit in the clinical trials, but also the population that we want to serve post-launch of these drugs. We think a lot about compliance frameworks and guardrails. So the perspective that I have is one of optimism. I think AI has a lot to bring to the table, but we also need to take a balanced viewpoint of one that is stems from trust but verification framework. Yes, we trust the colleagues that we work with, but we want to have a very systematic risk-based framework that we can leverage to think about how we deploy responsible and also fit-for-purpose AI. So really excited to be on this panel. Thank you, Vivli, for putting this together. Over back to you, Ida.
Great. So you can see the variety of perspectives. Tying our discussion back perhaps to the previous two panels where we've talked about the European health data space and health information exchange, where we're pulling data together that's been primarily for care coordination, but the opportunities for research are so high. there's a term that goes around AI ready. And what does that mean if we're thinking, casting ourselves 5 years ahead, and we've got EHDS working and National Health IE working, and what does it mean for that data to be AI ready, and what would that get us? Anyone want to take that one on?
Yeah, maybe I can start with that because I just came back from our Research Data Alliance, and if you go to every room, that will talk about AI-ready data set. And of course, there is a lot of definitions, but mainly I think people refer to like data quality. Is it quality enough that you can train AI models? And then something about also like the documentation, like that can people understand enough your data to use it? And also the access. Like I think we talk a lot about the legal issues, the ethical issues, that are you allowed to use those data that for your purpose. And I should mention like there is two things that we kind of look at it. One is that there was the Earth Science AI-ready checklist. That's kind of what the import actually is used to build the AI-ready data set. And there's another just published as a bioarchive. If you search probably Bridge AI standards. I forgot exactly the name, but that there is also a framework that what AI-ready means for biomedical data.
Go ahead.
And maybe I can offer from the perspective wearing the hat of thinking from a YODA project as we expect to be ready for increased project requests coming in. We're thinking about what type of infrastructure does our current platform where we host the data in that secure environment, does it have enough computing power? Does it have enough just technical ability to support the projects? We've been doing a pilot where we've almost had to alternate researchers so that they don't bog down the system and use up all the capacity. So really trying to understand that from an infrastructure perspective. But then also on the policy and ethics side, the data use agreements, any of the permissions, just kind of pressure testing. We're starting off with the assumption that this shouldn't break the system or shouldn't really, we have those processes built in, but are there certain terms in our informed consent? So we're just doing a little bit of a thought exercise as we think about secondary use of, are we trying to at least address some of those potential roadblocks? I really like the comment, I think it might have been David Leventhal also, how do we better characterize the data that we do have so people can understand the characteristics? Can you use synthetic data to describe what your data set actually looks like? So really trying to think about the transparency of what is available so it can be maximized and that it feeds into that understanding of if you're going to apply artificial intelligence to it, knowing what the key features of the data set. So those are just a few things we're sort of thinking about now in the context of data sharing.
I think one thing I'd add is, the tremendous opportunity that we have now that we probably didn't have, about a decade ago, are all of these data sets that we're collecting, right? So, at home, video data, imaging data, biomarker data, clinical care data, et cetera. In terms of making these data sets AI ready, the harmonization and labeling of data sets is quite important, right? So we talk a lot about AI these days, but really what actually gets us to there, and I think Dawei was mentioning the Bridge to AI project, is really having that enormous focus on data. I'm seeing a lot of that, not just within our organization, but also, peer pharma, and also others, and especially enabled by organizations and platforms like Vivli, is how do we standardize cross-study data sets so that we could, in fact, do that cross-study analysis, right? Because each study, you collect the data in a certain form. You've got the case report forms, you've got the patient-reported data. But then if I now want to compare with a similar mechanism of action with another study, we're not able to do that because there's not that harmonization that's possible. So I think in order to be really AI ready, we need to kind of think about, how do we enable these cross-study comparisons? I think just in terms of enormity of data, we think a lot about, for example, the genomics data. If I think I read recently somewhere that the amount of genomic data that we collect in 1 year, if you actually put them in 1.6 millimeter CD-ROMs, well, first of all, when I say that to my son, he'll say, what's a CD-ROM? Once we get past the definition of a CD-ROM, you actually put this data, you can stack the CD-ROMs from Earth to the moon and a quarter of a way back, right? This is just 1 year's worth of genomic data that we're collecting. And so we think a lot about how do we make that fit for purpose? How do we constrain the data to really give us the answers that we're looking for? So, I mean, there's a lot of obesity research that's going on now, right? So, GLP-1s, are there potential combinations of these drugs? What are the mechanisms of action? From all of this array of genomic data, could we actually constrain and get down to that biological pathway? It's actually not easy to do, right? And AI can help us, but then we need to label and harmonize this data and make it fit for purpose before we can feed them into these models. So AI readiness is a good way to kind of, think about how we go from this enormous amount of information to something that can help me answer the questions that I have in front of me.
One other thing I'd like to throw out is just speaking as an attorney on these issues, is also thinking about the issue of bias. Like, do we have a data set that's representative for the population on which it will be used? And this is something we've seen even in the US, like state attorney generals be very interested in recently in sending letters to hospitals asking about AI tools that they're using at the hospital, and has this been trained in a way that is going to work on the population you serve and won't have bias and not work in certain populations. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind.
So maybe I can add another point. I think because the Subha kind of mentioned about standard kind of triggered my thought. So we just organized a workshop on AI and immunology like in May this year, and the report is published in Nature Immunology. And one of the discussion about the AI ready is that is not a static thing. It's kind of moving along, and the clinicians in the room. And in the end, they all regret that the clinical notes they write before they're using the codings. And they said if they know the large language model exists, probably they will just record all the conversations with the patient, and then has much richer information that they can use for the clinical trial study or treatment. So I think that's the aspect is that is kind of, when you say ready, it's probably like have to define like at what stage you are at, and then you may have different take on it.
Yeah, that actually, it's a really interesting point. I've just started using AI Scribe in my clinical care. So now I can just talk to my patients without having to type my notes at the same time. And many of my patients are Chinese, so I speak to them in Chinese and I write my notes in English, and it's kind of a mess. But now I don't have to do that. I just talk.
Yeah.
And the AI generates a note. But you know what? That note that's generated is highly abstracted. All the nuance about where they went for traveling, how their son is doing, or their housing, it's just like blood pressure, AM blood pressure, whatever. So, yeah, it's interesting. The source data itself is going to start to be affected by how AI is used in our work life, in our workflow, and maybe some comments on that. And this reflects to the previous two conversations too, right? We kind of have assumed, but the data comes out the way that we've always had it come up, but that is just not true anymore.
Well, and I was going to ask Ida, that's really interesting. So do you find yourself having to, let's say your patient told you something really important personally that didn't get captured. Do you find yourself spending time going in to add that, or do you just not even have time and you're like, well, I don't have time to go back and that's what I'm always interested in, is the human in the loop review of what that was. Does it increase the time you now have to take, or do you just not even have the time and can't go back and maybe change or augment?
So the system that I'm using is Ambiance, and I don't have any financial dealings with any of these companies, but it generates the note in different sections. So there's the chief complaint, the HPI, and then the after visit summary for those of you who are on Epic. I look at the HPI and I scan it and I do add in the colored commentary that I want, but that's very selective. That's very selective.
And dependent on how much time you have then, and how remembering
and how much I know of them and what the purpose is. So you see, there's a lot, and you can imagine how bias comes in now, right? In which of your patients you're interviewing. I don't use the assessment and plan. I do that myself, but the majority of our clinicians at UCSF are using the AI-generated assessment and plan. So there's a lot of introduction of a a factor that I think we haven't
Interesting.
had much experience before that we should.
Yeah, I think to build on that, and also Dawei was talking about quality, which is so central to AI readiness, and how this data are now collected. You're talking to AI, you're talking to AI tools, it's capturing data. We're using co-pilots to summarize information. We actually ran a challenge last year, not so much in the context of provider interaction, but more in the context of regulatory documents that come out of clinical trials, right? We call them CSRs, clinical study reports. These are 100-page documents. Every study we generate a clinical study report, and there are hundreds and hundreds of them every year. So the question that the team was asking was, could AI create the agency for medical writers by putting first drafts in front of them to allow for just the interpretation piece? So if all the sections, because these are standard templates, if you slot in all the text for first draft, then could people just go in and add their color commentary or this? And we had 21 different partners participate. This is public information. You can kind of look up. I think this was published in JAMIA, and you can find it. What we found was, and this was pre-GPT 4.0 days, so it's 3.0 series. We found that the factual accuracy was less than 80%, right? But even so, 80% is pretty good for a first draft, right? And then the medical writers could go in and talk about these sections. What we also learned, we're talking generative AI, not the analytic AI, right? So it's very bad at arithmetic, for example, right? So you start to think about what are those areas where we really need that human in the loop. So it would make some really silly mistakes if there were 22 patients and 11 patients on each arm, placebo and the treated arm. It would start to summarize for all 22 instead of talking just about the 11 that were on the treated arm and things like that. So the next iteration of that challenge was, okay, now I can highlight in blue all the arithmetic sections and the interpretation sections that I do want the human input on, right? And so I think it's not just the machines iteratively learning, but it's also the humans learning how I can use these systems better, and what are those areas where AI may not be perfect, but I think the combination of AI and human can really elevate the quality of the data that we collect.
I like the example of you saying what tools can we use to help highlight for the humans where we want them to focus, because one of my big concerns that we've been talking a lot about informed consent forms, and trying to make this positive, is as we do that, can you actually focus them on the places, like take care of the stuff that they'll still need to review, but then really highlight and say this is where you need to spend your time. So that's super interesting.
Yeah,
I haven't heard of that one.
and it's super helpful for people, because now they don't have to look through the 100-page document.
Right, the 100
they
page,
can
they can
focus.
go to the sections.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Has anybody been using generative AI to make clinical trials sort of more accessible and understandable to participants and patients who might want to join the trial?
I have a project that I'm working on with a few people right now to understand more of we've been talking about, is it appropriate, in what context might it be appropriate to use like a chat bot to help explain factual things, which I think a lot of us have talked about, and helping, again, draw those lines, like Subha said, of where do you not want, like if it's the individual's medical experience and you're starting to get into interpretation, how do you have appropriate off-ramps to get that person to a human, but can you use it? And because right now the electronic informed consent is basically like DocuSign. We throw a 40-page PDF in there and it's not helpful at all. So can you make it more engaging by using some of these tools, including chatbots or assistants or avatars to help but yet, again, where do you find the appropriate off-ramp? So definitely some opportunities in informed consent that we're working on and trying to figure out if we can put together a project that shows where you can showcase what good looks like to try to spur industry to get over that hump that we've been seeing of really incorporating it effectively.
I think just to add another example to what Karla is just talking about, the World Health Organization recently launched a chatbot called Sarah, and this, you can actually talk to Sarah. I mean, she's not perfect. She's a digital avatar, but she'll talk to you about, I think they had launched it, if I remember correctly, in the non-communicable diseases space. It's intended to be an educational chatbot where you could actually talk to her. Of course, she's not perfect, but it depends on what information you use to train these chatbots, and that's something that the regulators are very much interested in, right? So how do you prevent sort of bias and hallucination? Now, can the chatbots talk about things outside of what the participant or the patient is asking? And so can you constrain that using the documents that are very specific and approved by your clinical team or your IRB to actually train these chatbots? So I think we're starting to see some of them come out. I could imagine, one of the projects that we work on pre-Pfizer days was with the PALS organization, so the Pancreatic Cancer Advocacy Network, where patients with advanced metastatic cancers would call this advocacy group to get recommendations on clinical trials and whatnot. And it was extremely constrained by manpower that was available, the humans who can actually take these phone calls. And we could imagine a situation where there could be these chatbots, et cetera, that could potentially be deployed if they're trained on the appropriate pancreatic cancer trials.
Like a closed data source with the bounds on what they can
with the
and cannot
boundaries.
interpret.
Yeah, exactly. And how transformational could that be? I think we're slowly starting to see some of those examples come out.
And I think one of the issues when I see clients that are using these technologies, like in the informed consent process or otherwise, is thinking about the oversight. What's the quality control to ensure that things are explained appropriately, and where is the human in the loop doing that oversight, especially if there are activities that when we think about from a regulatory standpoint, the investigator is supposed to have oversight over. How does he or she exercise that oversight when it's an AI activity or an AI technology that's providing that information to the clinical trial subject, for example?
Yeah, maybe I'll just add an example. Probably you can try it yourself. You're trying to explain like what import is, and using the ChatGPT is doing really well. And then you can ask, like say, can you explain import to a second grader?
Yeah.
And can you explain the import to a philosopher or maybe a politician? And they gave a really nice perspective. I think that's kind of the power that the generative AI can help facilitate the communications.
And it can now generate a podcast for you also. Right, that's the next step.
It'll be an AI panel next time.
Yeah, we could
AI
all just
version of each of us.
a generative panel. We can have a But I think it's time to open the floor up to questions. This is a new topic, so are there questions in the room, and are there questions on the Zoom? Oh, yeah, we'll start in the room.
Thanks very much, really interesting. What does the panel think that the role is in AI in relation to the kind of traditional statistical inference that's used for these trials? Because just now, even though they come from similar kind of mathematical traditions, they sit like these two rival magisteria. So what's going to happen in the future about statistics in AI?
I can start, and hopefully colleagues will join. My running joke is that if I can convince my statistics colleagues with the AI outputs, then I can convince anybody in the world, the President of the United States. Well, maybe not the current one. Anyway. Yeah, I think that's a very important question for us to consider. The way I like to think about it is, I think AI allows us to be discovering more data, right? So it's more discovery, it helps us expand, broaden our aperture to what other data can help me solve my problems. But at the end of the day, the confirmatory analysis have to be done through statistical analysis, right? And so I'll give you a classic example. So this is, our COVID programs. There was a question around who actually gets severe disease, right? Who gets severe disease of COVID, and does that have an impact on, who gets antiviral treatments, for example, right? And there are so many implications to this. So when this research started, we had a rough idea. Our clinical teams had an idea that, maybe it has something to do with age. Maybe it has something to do with blood pressure, right? So those 2 or 3 data points. But once you start integrating clinical trial data, perhaps healthcare utilization data from claims in EHR, it broadens your aperture to all of these potential possibilities, these features that could be associated with severe disease of COVID. I think AI does a very good job of that, expanding your feature space and also prioritizing those features. And then we had to take that to our statistics colleagues to say, what are those 7 or 8 features that are absolutely confirmatory that we then want to test in our next clinical trial, or to make that part of a care process where the clinician is saying, I need to check off these few data elements before I prescribe an antiviral, right? So I think it's not either or, it's both, and how and where we collaborate between AI and statistics. I think it's an emerging theme. Lots of great conferences to have this conversation. The Joint Statistical Conference every year. They have a whole section now around AI/ML and how to kind of bring together some of the statistical thinking and the AI/ML thinking together.
Yeah, maybe I want to add a little bit perspective, like very different from the traditional statistical thinking, is that the AI make the statistical analysis much accessible to people who not necessarily to be statisticians, and so in the sense you have to know R or SAS to know how to do the analysis, right? But OpenAI allow you to use just natural language, and to do the analysis, like to generate like a general linear model or something. Actually, we did this for an intern project. It took that intern like 3 months to do the analysis, and then we repeat that on the OpenAI, just use natural language, like in 2 hours. And the result is very comparable. So I think that's kind of another opportunity that maybe a lot of more people can do the analysis, right? That's kind of one aspect, but they also, like say, if you really want a kind of rigorous result, now the people can use that the AI technology can really formalize a very good question, right? They couldn't ask that question before. So with that capability, I think we can see a lot more kind of collaboration, maybe the innovation from the new capabilities.
Question.
Yes, Oladayo from the DAIT, thank you. At a session yesterday at the MRCT presentation, there was the talk about synthetic data and digital twins. Can you address that and the risk that process in actually giving trust in the type of data that we bring out?
Excellent question. Digital twin synthetic data.
So I'll just mention on synthetic data, we've been looking at it as an option to make data more accessible with less risks related to privacy. So can you use synthetic data in circumstances where you're wanting to create more open access because you have better privacy protection? We're also doing a pilot right now to almost do what Dawei was saying about doing an analysis with an actual data set, creating the synthetic data and comparing the results. So we're starting to just try to use it to, because some of these tools are pushing us to think about broader access outside of some of the secure environments, or even just increasing the amount of data available. And I still want to go, I love the idea though of using synthetic data even to characterize what the features of that data set are. I think that's really interesting, hadn't thought of that. So I guess we're not looking at synthetic data, I think you might have said as a risk, we're looking at it as really opening up some opportunities with discipline and rigor and analysis to create broader access to, and to create data that gets over some of the hurdles that we've had with sharing data from a security and privacy perspective.
Yeah, I think just to build on that, I mean, I'm quite bullish actually about the digital twin technology. So just to kind of describe that to folks who may not have heard, the concept of digital twins actually comes from the airline industry. So they wanted to create digital twins of these engine parts, et cetera, so that they don't actually have to test it in the production system, and they actually test it in these digital twins, and it actually really made the processes very efficient. So the question is, can we actually map that back to life sciences and the healthcare situation? The one area where I'm quite bullish about digital twins is in control arms in clinical trials, right? Let's say a registrational clinical trial, you need about 400 patients, let's say, and 200 patients on the control arm, 200 patients on the treatment arm. Do we need to recruit those 200 patients in the control arm? We have studied breast cancer for so many years. We've studied atopic dermatitis for so many years. We've studied viral infections for so many years. And this ties in with sort of Vivli's and MCRT's mission of data sharing, right? So if there is enough data sharing, you could imagine a situation where you could accurately construct the 200 digital twins who can actually be part of that control arm, and then all you do is recruit patients, and that cuts your time frame to half, right? So instead of taking 10 years to actually develop a drug, now maybe we could be at 5 or 6 year time frame because you can recruit only half the number of patients. The EMA has been much more, I think, receptive of the idea of digital twins. There have been some guidelines and some regulations that have come out. I think FDA and others are still thinking about it. But I do think that in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see more and more of that, especially in the context of all the data that are being collected, well-labeled data sets in diseases that we have studied for a very long time. There is a perfect use case here to construct the control arm patients using digital twins.
And one of the questions that's coming up in the bioethics community is, at what point do you have a tipping point where it's unethical to not that's probably strong, but like you have an ethical motivation and to actually use that and expose fewer patients. So there's been I see Barbara rolling her eyes, so I will emphasize we're not there, and that's an interesting discussion, but it's percolating. I saw that.
So
I need an ethicist with me all the time. When I make comments, I should travel in pairs. Yeah.
So it sounds like at some point Vivli will be collecting and sharing data sets of digital twin control arms. And so when you go to Vivli, you might be accessing synthetic data as part of this study data set. That would be quite interesting. And then just be careful if you pull those, because then you're pulling synthetic data with synthetic data.
Quite enabling.
So maybe you can add another perspective about concern of the synthetic data, right? Because you have used that because you don't have data. And we mentioned a lot about the small sample size. And actually for immunology diseases, like especially the autoimmune disease, you're never going to have a big cohort. The reason is like the immunology response, you have to have comparable result with the same exposure history, and at a certain time you're taking drug, different age. There was a lot of complications, so you will not have the cohort. But although the symptoms may be different, but the underlying mechanism can be the same. So maybe the kind of the foundation models can help you to really kind of mine the clinical nodes and to see if many of them are maybe share some common mechanism. So they can be like a new cohort that increase the size. So that's kind of maybe another way to think about increase the usable data.
Maybe let's take one question.
Ben Rhodes
One
from
question.
Eli Lilly. I think the thing that I have a concern with thinking about control arms and digital twins is that's an assumption that the standard of care hasn't progressed from the point in time in which you created the data for those digital twins. And I think we're seeing clinical care continuing to progress even more rapidly than it has in the past. And in some situations, I mean, if you're talking about a placebo control, absolutely, can consider that. But if you're truly doing standard of care versus the comparator, then you're going to have to really match standard of care, especially as there are these opportunities in the European health data space to say, does the patient group that was in the trial look like the patient group that exists today? Because they're not going to look the same if it's data from 10 years ago.
I think that's a good reminder for all applications of artificial intelligence and scientific rigor. And as we look, and this is what I say a lot internally at J&J, is like you can't just throw out the window all the things you knew about statistical analysis, ethical conduct of research, and all these things. It still is the rigor of what are you trying to compare and what are you trying to achieve, not just because you can do synthetic data. I think that's an important push, because the more people see it as a cost savings, well, we should just have the synthetic data for everything, because then we save money and it's faster. So I do think continuing to be important advocates for appropriate, rigorous science and research and ethical conduct of research is important.
Wonderful. Well, in keeping with our theme of focusing on opportunities, I'll ask each of the panelists in our closing minutes here to give what you think is the sort of the highest value use of AI that you might see in the near future. You take them.
So I mean, as an attorney, and we haven't really talked about this, maybe it's a little bit different for this panel, but we definitely see a lot of opportunities in law firms and elsewhere to use it in our practice and to help with research tasks and understanding and putting together legal arguments even. And now when I see the Google results, whenever I Google something and I see the AI suggestion, I see a lot of mistakes there, but I see like, oh, it lets you trace back the sources, and if you use it in that way and do a lot of quality control, it may be helpful. So very different than I know what most of you work on, but in my personal life, that's how I see it coming into play.
Yeah, maybe I would add on to that. I think I'm also very optimistic about the generative AI, and I think that's the opportunity that take advantage of the knowledge what are already accumulated. For example, there is a foundation models really map out the central dogma, the DNA models, the protein models, and also the single cell models. And the research now can not necessarily from scratch, it's kind of from really the guidance for that. And plus the kind of together with the other innovations, from different fields, like the engineering models and the material science models. I think we're going to see the people kind of generate the new proteins. They have a new, maybe innovative clinical trials. So I think that's kind of the things we like to see probably more and more happening.
So AI driving the process of research as well as
the
output. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Karla.
Mine's a little similar to David, and I do love those. Like, I look at them with skepticism, but then I often find nuggets. I think that will be part of the challenge of data sharing we've seen in industry is just helping people understand what's available. And wouldn't it be great if this could be a way of really surfacing and characterizing what is available and making connections around here are all the data sets that have been shared through all the different platforms and really seeing if that can make an impact and helping people understand what's available.
Yeah, I think two things, right, in terms of opportunities. One is definitely the productivity equation is positive. I think we all can vouch for that. I was sharing this with one of the colleagues here, that we have something called the Bravo Awards, where we appreciate colleagues at the end of the week for all the workshops and all the work and all the collaborations throughout that week. It used to take me literally the entire Friday afternoon to write these Bravo Awards. I do them exactly in 10 minutes now, or less, right? And to your point, how can we be better prompt engineers, right? So if you say, write it like a clinical pharmacologist, write it like a statistician, write it like a data scientist, write this award statement like a statistician, I do it in less than 10 minutes. So I think it's creating an agency for higher level thinking, better work, so that some of this grunt work. So clearly that the productivity equation is positive. I think the better, bigger opportunity is, nobody really trusts AI, but everybody wants to kind of gather around AI. So what we're starting to see is the ways of working are changing, right? Because especially in large organizations, there are too many silos. Everybody has their expertise, their data, et cetera, and their focus. But people will come around an AI dashboard to see what medical affairs is doing, what commercial is doing, what R&D is doing, right? And so if this is the way that we bring people together and we can actually trigger new thought processes and new insights, I think that's a great win for AI. And I think there is a huge opportunity there for us to bring people together and allow people to connect in ways that they have not done so before.
Wonderful. AI is a social technology. Well, let's take away here a sense of a bright future for AI for this Friday afternoon, and we're off for lunch. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much. You know what, as I'm sitting here thinking, I just would love to, thank you for the panel. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much. As I'm thinking, and Barbara coming up, I'm just thinking I'd love to reprise all of these panels, including this one, having Stefan back, and HIE and the panel in 3 years. What do you think, Barbara?
I think
3 years? 2 years? 4 years?
Like tomorrow.
I don't think we'll solve all the problems and all these or have a forward thought in tomorrow, but maybe in a few years.
Yeah.
What
I think so.
Yeah. Well, I just thought, Barbara and I will close. I just had some, closing thoughts, and we will leave you to lunch. But I saw some common themes across all the panels today, and I just wanted to leave you with some thoughts, and I know Barbara will also close us. So some things I saw across the panels that I was, very hopeful is some things I noticed were, there were a lot of commonalities across the panels, how to share data while maintaining the public trust. Common goals of, towards faster cures and therapeutics, and how to get there were clearly, governance and permissioning and the complexities of secondary use. There were concerns around, consent and re-identification, especially with the advent of AI and interoperability and harmonization. These are not new issues, but there are ones that we really have not yet solved. And future and forward-looking, there's a lot of promise around AI, and I thought this was really an interesting panel and offers great promise, of course, with the appropriate guardrails. So, Barbara, your thoughts?
Sure. I think a couple of things. One, I was incredibly impressed with how far we've come in the use of data, the understanding of what we can do with data, the sort of responsibility that we have for that data and governance of that data. And that evolution has been unbelievably fast. And when we think of when this started, Vivli started, 10 years ago. MRCT is 15 years old. We were in a completely different space. And we're now talking about, using the incredible depth of data for public health discovery and making the world better. That comes with it a huge responsibility as well, which I think we heard today. And I think the one thing that I would emphasize is how we need to really take education and transparency seriously, because we need the public to stay with us as we do this, because that's going to be the greatest risk, I think, for how we are criticized or celebrated for the work we do. And I leave that as a sort of grounding reminder of our work ahead.
So thank you so much for your participation today, and we welcome you to lunch and further conversation. Thanks.
That was so great. Today was great.